Hi everyone, it's Hayley here from the Gale Library in Newton, and I am here with your Harry Potter Wednesday. So if you remember last week, we started reading J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I'm reading the big illustrated version of this, which has some lovely illustrations. And this week we are reading chapter 2. If you missed chapter 1, you can tune into our YouTube channel. So you can just go to YouTube, search Gale Library Newton, and our channel will pop right up, and you can listen to chapter 1 via YouTube. It's also on our Facebook page. At the end of chapter 1, we also made Harry Potter wands. So if you're interested in making your own magic wand, just tune in at the end of the chapter, and there are instructions there on how to make your very own Harry Potter wand. After chapter 2, we're actually going to be making some dragon eggs. So if you're interested in learning how to make a dragon egg, just for some fun, stay tuned after we finish chapter 2. So if you remember, at the end of chapter 1, we met the characters, Professor McGonagall and Albus Dumbledore and Hagrid, and what happened was there was a celebration between the wizard world, and Harry Potter, the little baby, was left on the Dursleys' doorstep. So that's where we left chapter 1. We will be reading chapter 2 this week, which is called The Vanishing Glass. Chapter 2 of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. But Pivot Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen the fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much the time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing a different coloured bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large blonde boy riding his first bicycle, on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice that made the first noise of the day. "Up! Get up, now!" Harry woke with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled back onto his back and tried to remember the dream he'd been having. It had been a good one. They had been flying around on a motorbike in it. He had a funny feeling he had had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Really?" said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything to be perfect on Dudley's birthday." Harry groaned. "What did you say?" his aunt snapped through the door. "Nothing, nothing." Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry slowly got out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed, and after pulling a spider off one of them, he put them on. Harry was so used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favourite punch bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was, because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times that Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. "In a car crash when your parents died," she had said. And don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for the quiet life of the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. That's a picture of under the stairs. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smooth on his thick, fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. "That's 2 less than last year." "Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Margie's present. See? It's here under this big one from Mummy and Daddy." "All right, 37 then," said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Popkin? 2 more presents. Is that all right?" Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, "So I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh." Dudley sat heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right then." Uncle Vernon chuckled. "Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley." He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went over to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap a racing bike, a camera, a remote control aeroplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. And every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at photographs of all the cats she had ever owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself that it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "We could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. "What about what's-her-name, your friend, Yvonne, on holiday in Mallorca?" snapped Aunt Petunia. "You could just leave me here," Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on the television for a change, maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. "And come back and find the house in ruins?" she snarled. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and leave him in the car." "The car's new. He's not sitting in it alone." Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried. But he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. "Dinky Duddydums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day," she cried, flinging her arms around him. "I don't want him to come," yelled Dudley between huge pretend sobs. "He always spoils everything." He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. "Oh, good Lord, they're here," said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Pierce and Dudley, on his way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he said, putting his large purple face right up to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short that he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she had left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and his sellotape glasses. Next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange bobbles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's head mistress telling them that Harry had been climbing school buildings. But all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Pierce to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't at school, his cupboard, or in Mrs. Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favourite subjects. This morning it was motorbikes. "Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums," he said as a motorbike overtook them. "I had a dream about a motorbike," said Harry, remembering suddenly. "It was flying." Uncle Vernon nearly crashed the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a moustache. "Motorbikes don't fly!" Dudley and Pierce sniggered. "I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in a way that it shouldn't, no matter if it was in a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with family. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon iced lolly. It wasn't bad either, thought Harry, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching its head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys, so that Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favourite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker Glory wasn't big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known that it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass were all sorts of lizards, and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to see huge poisonous cobras and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place, could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at the moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," ordered Dudley. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long, was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "Must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where'd you come from anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at the little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. Boa constrictor, Brazil. Was it nice there? The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you," he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast that no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Pierce and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass in front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea, while he apologized over and over again. Pierce and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it had passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Pierce was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Pierce, calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Pierce was safely out of the car before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go! Cupboard! Stay! No meals!" before he collapsed into a chair, and Aunt Petunia had to run to get him a brandy. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years. 10 miserable years. As long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during those long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burn of pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke of them, and of course he was forbidden to ask any questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe just hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were too. A tiny man in a violet top hat had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman dressed in an all-green had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter and his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. that was the end of chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. So keep watching to find out how to make a dragon egg. And we will be back next Wednesday live in the library for chapter 3, which is called The Letters from No One of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Stay tuned, you guys, and I will see you soon for dragon eggs and next week for chapter 3. Have a great week. Hi everyone, it's Hayley here from the Gale Library in Newton, and I am here with your Harry Potter dragon egg craft today. So if you joined us for chapter 2, I did tell you that we would be making a dragon egg this afternoon. So I'm going to tell you what you need. What you can use for your dragon eggs is some old Easter eggs, which I have a bunch of. So if you need some, come find me at the library and come grab one. And you will need a hot glue gun. So please remember, if you are not old enough to use your hot glue gun, get the help of a grown-up. This is why we have this program for 8 years old and above, because you have to be very, very careful when you're using this hot glue gun to make these dragon eggs. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, having plugged my hot glue gun in already, is we're going to take our egg, and the safest way to start making our texture on our egg for our dragon's egg is to make a base so that we don't have to hold our egg anywhere near the hot glue gun. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a tiny bit of hot glue onto this piece of cardboard that I have, and I'm going to stick my egg on top so it holds itself up. Now, the same as we did for the Harry Potter ones that we made last week, we're going to use a hot glue gun to make texture on this egg. So all we're going to do is we're going to go around the egg and layer some texture onto it, like so. And what we have to do is wait for it to dry before we go again with the next layer. So I'm going to leave that for a moment. While it's drying, I'm just going to slide it over there. Another good thing you can do with your dragon egg is make a little terrarium to hold your egg. So if you have an old vase at home, such as this one I have here, you can use plastic or you can use glass if you're going to be very careful and pop it on display. Now, when we make a terrarium, we're trying to layer some items, and you can use anything. I found some items in the library that I was going to use to make my dragon egg terrarium, and I thought I would start. I found some old beads that we have, and I'm just going to make a few layers. Dragons like sparkles. So I'm going to add a layer of beads, and the layers just make it look really pretty when you put your dragon egg in top. So my first layer is beads. And then I found some sparkles. Dragons love sparkles. So I'm just going to add a couple of sparkles in there too, into my layering. And then I found some sand, and I found green, and I found yellow. So I'm just going to add a layer of green sand. Shake it up a little bit. And a layer of yellow, just to give some texture to our terrarium. Now, because I put the sand in, we've lost our beads, so I wonder if I could put some more on the top so that we can see our beads again. Let's have a look. I'm just going to go around the edges. That looks really pretty. Around the edge with some beads on top of our sand. That looks very cute. All right. So I have my beads. I have my sand. Now I'm going to add, I found some cotton wool balls because we need something soft to lay our dragon egg on top of. So I found some cotton wool that I'm just going to pull apart because I don't want to put all the whole thing in like balls. I want it to look like a cloud. So it's very soft for the dragon egg to sit on. And it's just a better texture. So I'm going to pull all this cotton ball apart and just make one more layer. So now my terrarium is ready for my dragon egg to sit in. I'm going to leave that one side for the moment and see if my hot glue is dry enough for me to pick up. It is. If your egg sticks to your cardboard, don't worry, we're going to paint it, so we can always just leave it on top or pick it off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it upside down, stick it back on, and do exactly the same thing again with the top to add some more layers. Like so. And then we're going to leave that to dry. I'm going to pop that to one side, and I'm going to show you one I made earlier, which is already dried. So I don't know if you can see the texture here, but the whole egg is covered in hot glue, and it has all different lumps and bumps, and it feels very, very textured. It feels great. So now what we need to do is paint it. The best paint to use is acrylic paint. If you use a water-based paint, it won't work on the plastic. So be sure to use an acrylic paint. So I chose an acrylic paint here, and I chose kind of a dragon egg blue. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, and you can see acrylic goes on really, really well. And you can't see the color through it. It actually colors really nicely. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover this whole egg in the acrylic paint until it is all one color. And I happen to have one that I painted earlier, so I'm just going to pop that one down for a minute and grab the one that I painted earlier, which is not quite dry, but you can see now that it's got some color on it, the texture of the egg. It looks very, very cool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wait till this is fully dry before we add some detail to the paint. So I'll be back once our complete dragon egg is dry to add some texture. So I'll see you in a moment for that. Stay tuned. All right, so we're back, and we've just got the finishing touches to put on our dragon egg. So as you can see, it's all painted, it's all dried, and it is looking very, very cool. So what I'm going to do, I've just found a little touch of silver. So what I'm going to do, just where the ridges are on my egg, I'm not going to paint the whole thing silver, but I'm just going to add a little bit more detail so that the texture just pops a little bit. So I'm just kind of going over the lumps, just making it look very rustic. And you don't have to do this. This is just additional detail that I choose to do. Just very, very lightly glazing over the top, and not all over, like I said, just going onto the little raised pieces and gently just giving it a little added detail. And I think I am happy with that, and you can do this as much as you like until you're happy with it. I feel good about that dragon egg, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Looks very cool. And then I'm going to get the terrarium that I made earlier, and I am going to pop my dragon egg in the terrarium, ready to hatch. This one has a lid. And there it is, dragon egg terrarium. And you can make as many of these as you like. I have some more here, and they're just drying, and then I'll add the gold touches later. So I hope you enjoyed this craft. I look forward to seeing you guys next week for Harry Potter Wednesday. Take care and have a good day. Bye.